Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into a topic that affects, well, billions globally. It often flies under the radar until, it hits close to home. We're talking about dengue.
That's right, an acute viral infection. It's actually the most common mosquito-borne viral disease in humans.
And the research we've looked at, it paints a pretty stark picture. Annually, estimates are like 50 to 100 million cases of dengue fever.
And maybe 500,000 severe cases. It leads to more than 20,000 deaths each year.
Yeah, and what's striking is the trend. The reported cases jumped hugely, right? From about 2.4 million in 2010 up to 5.2 million in 2019.
Spreading to new areas, causing these massive outbreaks.
And it's a big concern for international travelers, too, something maybe not everyone thinks about.
Absolutely. So our mission today is really to dig into this material, understand what dengue truly is, from the virus itself to its global impact.
How it affects the body, how it's managed.
And really crucially, what we can actually do to prevent and control its spread. You might have some aha moments because there's definitely more to this tiny mosquito's bite than you might think.
Dengue story, what it is and how it spreads.
Okay, let's unpack this then. What exactly is dengue? We know it's a virus, but what makes this one special? Our sources say it's a single-stranded RNA virus, flavivirus genus.
Right.
But the really fascinating part seems to be these 4 distinct serotypes, DENV1, 2, 3, and 4. What's the deal with those? Why is that so important?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting and kind of tricky immunity-wise. So if you get infected with, say, DENV1, you're immune to DENV1 for life. That's good.
Okay.
But the catch is you only get cross-protection against the other 3 serotypes for maybe a few months.
Only a few months?
Yeah, just temporary. And this leads to a really critical point highlighted in the research. Getting infected a second time, especially with a different serotype like DENV2 after having had another one, that dramatically increases your chances of developing the severe forms. Dengue hemorrhagic fever, dengue shock syndrome. It's like your immune system overreacts the second time around.
Wow. Okay. So that secondary infection is a major risk factor. Given that, just how big is this problem? You mentioned billions at risk earlier.
It's huge. The sources estimate around 2.5 billion people in over 100 countries are living in areas where they could get dengue.
2.5 billion?
Yeah. And take India, for example. Dengue is endemic, meaning it's constantly present in almost half the country. All 4 serotypes have been found there.
Any specific examples?
Well, Delhi had its worst outbreak since 2006, back in 2015, over 15,000 cases. And more recently, the 2019-2020 data showed really significant numbers in West Bengal, Karnataka, Gujarat, Uttar Pradesh. It's widespread.
So how does the virus actually, get around? Who are the main players?
It's basically humans and mosquitoes. What's quite unique here, the research notes, is that the virus has adapted so well to humans, it doesn't need an animal reservoir to keep going. So the typical cycle is just man-mosquito-man. A mosquito bites someone who's in the viremia stage. That's when the virus is actively in their blood.
And when is that exactly?
Usually from about the day before they show symptoms up to the 5th day of the illness, the mosquito ingests the virus.
Right.
Then there's an incubation period inside the mosquito, the extrinsic incubation, about 8 to 10 days. After that, the mosquito is infectious for the rest of its life.
For life. Wow. And wasn't there something in the sources about how the virus survives even between epidemics, like when there aren't many infected people around?
Yes, exactly. It's called transovariant transmission. The virus can actually get into the mosquito's eggs.
Into the eggs.
Yeah. So the virus can basically pass down to the next generation of mosquitoes, helping it survive those quiet periods. And then in humans, once you're bitten by an infectious mosquito, the incubation period is usually 3 to 10 days, typically around 5 or 6 days before you feel sick.
Okay. And the mosquitoes themselves, they're quite specific vectors, aren't they?
Very specific. The 2 big ones are Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus.
The tiger mosquitoes.
That's the nickname, yeah, because of their black and white stripes. Aedes aegypti is the main urban culprit. It's highly domesticated, prefers feeding on humans. We call that anthropophilic.
Yeah.
And it's a nervous feeder. It takes small sips from multiple people to get a full meal.
Which explains why you get clusters of cases, right? One mosquito infecting several people in a household or neighborhood.
Precisely. And they bite mainly during the day, which is important for personal protection. They breed in artificial water collections, things like discarded tins, old tires, flower pots, water storage jars, even coconut shells, any standing water near homes.
And Aedes albopictus.
Albopictus is a bit different. It's more common in suburban or rural areas, but it can invade urban peripheries too. also an aggressive daytime biter.
So looking at the bigger picture, what environmental conditions really fuel an epidemic?
Well, connecting the dots from the research, several things come together. High population density, for one. Inadequate sanitation. Poor drainage. These create breeding sites.
Urban sprawl plays a role.
Definitely. Unplanned urbanization is a big factor. Plus, modern transportation helps the virus, and infected mosquitoes or people move around quickly. Even in rural areas, things like new water supply schemes, better roads, sometimes even water scarcity, forcing people to store water. These can contribute.
And the timing.
Epidemics are often influenced by the specific virus strains circulating, how many mosquitoes there are, their behavior, how susceptible the human population is, like if a virus strain hits a community that hasn't encountered it before. And very typically, you see peaks during and right after the monsoon season. Lots of standing water then.
The dengue story, how it manifests in the body.
Okay, this is where it gets, well, potentially really serious for someone who's infected. What does dengue actually look like? We know it's a spectrum, right? From no symptoms at all to, well, much worse.
Exactly. It varies hugely. For instance, infants, kids, even adults having their first ever dengue infection might just get what's called an undifferentiated fever.
Meaning
It just looks like a regular fever, maybe some flat reddish rashes, maybe some respiratory symptoms like a cough, or maybe some stomach upset. Hard to tell it's dengue just from that.
Okay. But the one we always hear about is classical dengue fever. The breakbone fever. That sounds awful. What are the key signs there?
Yeah, breakbone gives you a pretty good idea. Classical dengue fever usually starts suddenly with a high fever. It can be biphasic, spikes up, drops, then spikes again.
Right.
Chills are common. Intense headache. And that really severe muscle and joint pain is the hallmark, hence the name. Another very characteristic symptom is retroorbital pain.
Pain behind the eyes.
Exactly. Pain when you move your eyes often. Plus, people often feel extreme weakness, loss of appetite, maybe constipation. Their taste might seem off, some abdominal tenderness.
Is there always a rash?
Often, yes. Typically a rubelliform rash. Looks a bit like measles. And lab tests usually show leukopenia, a low white blood cell count. The whole illness typically lasts about 5 to 7 days, and then thankfully usually leads to complete recovery.
Okay, so that's classical dengue. But you mentioned it can get much worse. How does it progress, and how do doctors classify that severity?
Right. The real danger is progression to dengue hemorrhagic fever, or DHF. This is a severe form, usually kicking in after about 4 or 6 days of illness, often right around the time the fever starts to break.
Oh.
Yeah, it has 3 phases. The febrile phase, fever, then the critical phase, and finally the recovery phase. The underlying problem, the pathophysiology, involves 2 main things: plasma leakage and problems with blood clotting or hemostasis.
Plasma leakage, what does that mean?
It means the tiny blood vessels, the capillaries, become leaky, and the plasma part of blood leaks out into surrounding tissues. This is really the central feature of severe dengue.
So how is DHF actually diagnosed? What do doctors look for?
Okay. Based on the clinical guidelines in our sources, there are 4 key criteria needed for a DHF diagnosis. 1, fever, acute onset, lasting 2 to 7 days. 2, some evidence of bleeding tendency. This could be a positive tourniquet test.
What's that?
They inflate a blood pressure cuff on your arm for a few minutes, and if you get lots of tiny red spots, petechiae below the cuff, that's positive. Or it could be spontaneous bleeding, like nosebleeds, gum bleeding, easy bruising, or even internal bleeding.
Okay.
3, a low platelet count, specifically below 100,000 cells per cubic millimeter. Platelets are crucial for clotting.
Right.
And 4, objective evidence of that plasma leakage we talked about. This could be shown by a rising hematocrit level.
Hematocrit.
That's the proportion of red blood cells in your blood. If plasma leaks out, the blood becomes more concentrated, so the hematocrit goes up, usually by 20% or more from the person's baseline. Or doctors might see fluid accumulation, like pleural effusion, fluid around the lungs, or ascites, fluid in the abdomen.
Got it. So those 4 things together signal DHF. How common is this severe form?
It's serious. Globally, about 500,000 people need hospitalization for DHF each year. And alarmingly, the sources say about 90% of those are children under 5.
90% children. That's terrifying.
It is. And sadly, about 2.5% of those affected end up dying.
And then there's dengue shock syndrome, DSS. That's even worse.
Yes, DSS is basically DHF plus signs of circulatory failure or shock. So you have all the criteria for DHF, and the patient has a rapid, weak pulse. Their pulse pressure narrows.
Pulse pressure.
The difference between the top systolic and bottom diastolic blood pressure numbers gets very small. They'll have low blood pressure overall, cold, clammy skin, and might be restless or lethargic. It's a state of profound circulatory collapse due to that plasma leakage.
So the WHO classification covers the spectrum: undifferentiated fever, dengue fever, DHF, and DSS.
Exactly.
And the research also mentioned a grading system specifically for DHF, grades 1 to IV.
Yes, that helps clinicians manage the severity. Grade 4 is the mildest DHF fever, general symptoms, positive tourniquet test, and evidence of plasma leakage, but no spontaneous bleeding yet.
Okay.
Grade 2 adds spontaneous bleeding like nosebleeds or gum bleeding.
Right.
Grades 3 and 4 are where shock comes in. Grade 3 is circulatory failure, rapid weak pulse, narrow pulse pressure, restlessness. Grade 3 is profound shock, where blood pressure and pulse might even be undetectable.
And grades to the 3rd and 4th together are essentially DSS.
Correct. Grades to 3rd and 4 DHF are collectively called Dengue shock syndrome.
Are there any other warning signs, maybe less common things, that people or doctors should watch for, signaling things might take a bad turn?
Absolutely. The sources list crucial danger signs, things like any tiny skin bleeds, nose or gum bleeds, severe abdominal pain that's persistent, passing black, tardy stools, which indicates internal bleeding.
Melena, right.
Melena, yes. Also, refusing to eat or drink, sudden changes in behavior like becoming very drowsy or irritable, difficulty breathing, producing very little urine oliguria, or having cold hands and feet. Any of those are red flags.
And there can be unusual complications, too.
Though less common, yes. Things like acute liver failure, brain involvement causing encephalopathy, or heart muscle problems like cardiomyopathy can happen, sometimes even without the classic signs of severe plasma leakage or shock.
The dengue story: management and treatment.
Okay, so someone gets diagnosed with dengue. What's the approach to managing it? What do the guidelines say?
Well, the first thing that comes through loud and clear is how critical, rapid, and accurate diagnosis is. It really guides the clinical management.
That makes sense.
The general approach starts with getting a full blood count and checking the baseline hematocrit level right at the first visit. Then it's all about close monitoring, watching that platelet count and the hematocrit.
Why those two specifically?
Because a rapid drop in platelets happening at the same time as a rise in hematocrit is a major warning sign. It strongly suggests the patient is entering, or already in, that critical phase of plasma leakage.
Okay, so let's take the simpler case first. Someone has classical dengue fever, like that 20-year-old female patient mentioned in one of the sources. How is that usually handled?
Right. For uncomplicated classical dengue fever, the key things are: can the patient drink fluids? Are they producing enough urine? And crucially, do they have any of those warning signs we just discussed?
Okay.
If they can drink well, have good urine output, and no warning signs, they can often be managed at home.
What does home management involve?
It's really about supportive care, encouraging plenty of fluids. Oral rehydration solution, ORS, is great, but also fruit juices, broths, anything with electrolytes and some sugar. Keep them hydrated.
And for the fever and aches?
Paracetamol or acetaminophen can be used for high fever or pain. But, and this is a really critical point emphasized everywhere, absolutely no aspirin and no NSAIDs.
Like ibuprofen or naproxen?
Exactly. Those drugs can interfere with platelet function and increase the risk of bleeding, which is already a concern in dengue. So strictly contraindicated.
Okay, very important. And what advice should caretakers get?
They need clear instructions to watch for any of those danger signs: severe abdominal pain, any bleeding, persistent vomiting, drowsiness, difficulty breathing, and to return for medical help immediately if any of those appear.
Right, so when does it become serious enough that home care isn't enough?
Yeah.
What triggers a shift in treatment?
Hospitalization becomes necessary for patients with DHF, even grade 1 or 2, especially if they have warning signs. Things like that: severe abdominal pain, persistent vomiting, any bleeding signs like melena or nosebleeds.
Okay.
They need close observation, particularly for signs of shock. The most critical period for shock developing is often during that transition when the fever starts coming down the defervescence phase. It's counterintuitive, but that's often when the plasma leakage peaks.
So what happens in the hospital?
If their hematocrit starts rising significantly, indicating that plasma leakage, that's the trigger to start intravenous or IV fluids. Usually crystalloid solutions like Ringer's lactate or normal saline are used.
And for the most severe cases, dengue shock syndrome, DSS.
That's a full-blown medical emergency. It requires immediate, aggressive IV fluid resuscitation to rapidly expand the plasma volume that's being lost.
More aggressive.
They might start with rapid boluses of fluid, like 10-20 milliliters per kilogram of body weight per hour, given quickly. Then the rate is adjusted based on how the patient responds, their pulse, blood pressure, urine output.
Are other treatments needed in shock?
Yes, oxygen therapy is usually given to all patients in shock, and they need frequent monitoring of electrolytes and blood gases. Sometimes, if there's major bleeding or if the hematocrit drops despite fluids suggesting internal hemorrhage, blood transfusions, fresh frozen plasma, or platelet concentrates might be needed.
And again, no aspirin or NSAIDs, right?
Absolutely not. Still strictly contraindicated.
So just to summarize the hospitalization criteria clearly, when does someone definitely need to be admitted?
The guidelines list pretty clear triggers. If that hematocrit rises by 20% or more, if the platelet count drops below 50,000, if there's any spontaneous significant bleeding, if they show signs of shock, if their urine output becomes very low, oliguria, or if they develop that bluish tinge around the mouth, circumoral cyanosis, any of those warrant admission.
And when are they generally considered safe to go home? What are the discharge criteria?
For discharge, patients generally need to be fever-free for at least 24 hours without needing fever-reducing medicine. They need to be clinically improving overall, feeling better. Their hematocrit needs to be stable. They should have good urine output. Platelets should be rising, ideally above 50,000. And they shouldn't have any respiratory distress or difficulty breathing.
The dengue story, controlling the spread.
Okay, let's shift gears to prevention and control. Connecting this all back, preventing dengue seems like a huge challenge, mostly focused on the mosquitoes, right? The sources really emphasize a comprehensive approach is needed. Vector surveillance, integrated management.
That's absolutely spot on. Controlling the human reservoir, meaning early detection and proper management of people who are sick. That's important. And prompt reporting helps health authorities react. But really, vector control, tackling the mosquitoes, that's the absolute cornerstone for breaking the transmission cycle.
So how do we effectively tackle these tiger mosquitoes? What are the main strategies?
It really starts at the personal level. Personal protection is key. Using mosquito repellents containing DEET or picaridin, wearing protective clothing, long sleeves, pants, socks, especially during the daytime when these mosquitoes are most active.
Even during the day?
Yes, absolutely. And using insecticide-treated bed nets is still recommended, especially for infants or people who sleep during the day, like night shift workers. Every bit helps reduce bites. Then there's what we call environmental management or source reduction. This is huge. It involves making long-term changes, like improving water supply systems so people don't have to store water as much, or mosquito-proofing water storage containers like overhead tanks or cisterns.
Making it harder for them to breed in the first place.
Exactly. And it also includes more immediate actions. Getting rid of or managing all those potential breeding sites, those discarded tins, broken bottles, tires, flower pot saucers, blocked gutters, even tree holes or coconut shells that collect water. Anything that holds clean water, basically. Filling low-lying areas, proper drainage. These things can have a permanent impact.
Can you make the water itself unsuitable?
Sometimes, yes. For instance, in certain containers, changing the water's salinity might work, though that's often not practical. The main focus is eliminating the standing water itself.
What about using nature against nature, biological controls?
Yeah, biological control is part of the mix. Using larvivorous fish that eat mosquito larvae like Gambusia or Poecilia, guppies, can be effective in permanent water bodies, like ornamental ponds or maybe some wells.
Okay. And chemical approaches, spraying and larvicides.
Chemical control still has a role, especially during outbreaks. You might see space spraying or fogging with insecticides like pyrethrum or malathion. The goal there is to quickly knock down the adult mosquito population to interrupt transmission.
That's the fogging trucks we sometimes see.
That's often what they're doing, yes. It provides temporary relief. Then there are larvicides, like Temifos, or newer ones like pyriproxyfen. These can be put into water containers that can't easily be emptied or removed, maybe large storage tanks, sometimes construction sites to kill the larvae before they become adults, and simple things like putting screens on doors and windows helps keep mosquitoes out of houses.
Okay, so lots of different tactics. But the sources talked about a broader, integrated strategy, especially for cities. Can you break that down? What does an integrated plan look like?
Right, the Integrated Vector Management or IVM approach, like the one outlined under India's National Vector-Borne Disease Control Program, is really about putting all these pieces together systematically. It starts with strong vector surveillance.
Monitoring the mosquitoes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Regularly checking for larvae using standard methods and indices like the House Index or Berthaud Index. These basically measure what percentage of houses or containers have larvae. The goal, interestingly, for Aedes aegypti is often to keep these indices below 1% in key areas like towns or seaports, partly also to prevent yellow fever, which uses the same vector.
So surveillance gives an early warning.
Yes, it helps track mosquito populations, identify high-risk areas, and hopefully forecast potential outbreaks, so control measures can be deployed before things get out of hand. They also monitor adult mosquito populations, using landing counts or traps. Then, the plan emphasizes intensifying that environmental management and source reduction we talked about, really focusing on homes and communities. Proper solid waste disposal is critical, fewer containers lying around. General urban cleaning helps too.
And combining the controls?
Yes, integrating biological and chemical controls where appropriate. And importantly, legislation. This involves enacting and enforcing local bylaws. Things like requiring property owners to keep their premises free of breeding sites, maybe with penalties for non-compliance. It helps foster community responsibility.
Which brings us to the community itself. How vital is their involvement?
Oh, absolutely paramount. You really can't succeed without community participation and mobilization. This relies heavily on information, education, and communication IEC activities.
Like awareness campaigns.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
Mass awareness campaigns, using local media, posters, community meetings, educating people about how dengue spreads, where mosquitoes breed, what the symptoms are, and what they can do to protect themselves and their families. Encouraging specific actions, like weekly dry day campaigns, where everyone checks for and empties containers. Getting people to report suspected cases quickly is also vital. And finally, this integrated approach requires strong coordination between different sectors. Health departments can't do it alone. They need to work with urban development, water supply, education, even non-governmental organizations. Everyone has a role. Plus, ongoing capacity-building training staff and research to find better methods. The National Health Policy goal back in 2002 aimed for a 50% cut in dengue mortality by 2010, showing the long-term focus. And being prepared for epidemics is key, having contingency plans, strong surveillance, and enough diagnostic kits, drugs, and supplies ready to go. Yeah. Outro.
So wrapping this up, what does this all really mean for you, our listeners? We've taken a really deep dive into dengue today. We've explored its complex spread, the virus itself, the huge range of symptoms from that awful breakbone fever right up to life-threatening shock.
And the many, many layers involved in trying to manage and control it.
Yeah. It's crystal clear this isn't just some faraway tropical disease anymore. It's a major global public health challenge. It demands effort from literally everyone, individuals, communities, governments, international bodies.
Precisely. And maybe the biggest takeaway is that knowledge really is power here, especially for prevention. Simple things you can do, like just checking around your own home or apartment balcony for any standing water flower pots, containers, anything, and getting rid of it regularly makes a real difference.
It really highlights how connected everything is, doesn't it? Our environment, our health systems, our community actions.
Absolutely. Thinking critically about urban planning, waste management, even our own habits, it all plays a direct role in tackling widespread health threats like dengue.
Which brings us to a final thought, something for you to ponder. As climate change continues to shift weather patterns and more people live in cities, what could be the next big breakthrough in dengue control? Beyond the mosquito control and treatments we have now, what might truly turn the tide against this incredibly adaptable virus?
Something to think about.
Keep learning, keep exploring, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.